This is a Borg-Warner SX200 S252. So this is for Justyns track car, basically. This is to give him more power for the Javelin Sprint series that he requires, and we can go. This is basically a proper turbo rather than a kind of hybrid or a standard turbo. This is a proper big boy turbo. This is a turbo that's not really used much with VXRs, or it's not a common turbo because people are put off by the fact that they're cheap. It's not that they're cheap; they are just a kind of watered down version of an EFR. So the compressor wheel is basically the same geometry as an EFR. The turbine wheel is very similar geometry to an EFR, and they come in very similar sizes to an EFR, but there's not water cooled. It's a journal bearing, and they only come with T3 twin scroll turbine housings, so that makes them a little bit awkward to match up to most manifold setups. So that's what we're going to do for Justyn. We're going to build our regular T4 twin scroll manifold, but then we're going to port this out to match it. The bolt pattern's the same, so we're going to port it out to match it, and then we've got to do something with this Marmon flange. So we're either going to run a Marmon flange, or we're going to get this machine down into a V-band. They are just like EFRs in many respects. They're just kind of a little bit less finished or polished. Like it's got a few kind of sharp edges on it in places, and the core is a little bit, they're just not as nicely finished. They are, you can tell it's less than half the price of an EFR, but for what most people need, these are just, they're just as good as anything else. Most people don't need an all-singing, all-dancing, ball-bearing turbo with all different kind of turbine housing options. In fact, these have actually got more options on the AR for the turbine housing than EFRs have. EFRs generally have no options. So if you want a 7670 with a T4 twin scroll flange, you're stuck with 1.05 AR. There are no options. Whereas with these, you can have 0.8, 1, 1.1, 1.2, 1.4. I think there's like 5 or 6 different turbine AR options. So it gives you a lot of different options with trying to pair that to whatever engine it is it's going to be bolted on. But yeah, first impressions are it's just as I thought it would be. It's I'm pretty confident it's going to do the job. This is basically one size down to a 7670 EFR. So this is basically a 7070. The compressor and the turbine wheel are pretty much the same size. So in kind of Garrett terms, it's basically a 35 turbine wheel paired with 67 compressor wheel. So it's basically like a GTX 3567. So it's quite a small compressor wheel with quite a big turbine wheel. But for a track car where you can keep the high RPM and twin scroll, I think it'll actually be about spot on. Today we are going to build Justyns T4 twin scroll external wastegate manifold. So this is going to be for his SX200 S252 turbo. We already know we're fine with clearances for our regular EFR manifold. So this manifold already fits up to any EFR, so up to a 9180. We was a little bit unsure about compressor cover sizes on the SX200 and SX300 range, but we definitely know that it's going to fit with the SX200 now, so we can crack on and build it. Start off with the 347 cast collector, as basically always on these Z20 manifolds now. All the Z20 manifolds we do have 347 cast collector. We're using all 347 bends, and following our cut sheet to fabricate all the primaries. The two outside ones are pretty easy. This number 2 primary here again is quite easy, and then this third one is the only tricky one because it kind of goes over the top of all the others and then loops down. But because we're using the Hypertune 347 bends, we've got loads of different radiuses and bends with legs on again, which makes this so much better to fabricate. Loads less weld joints, which is, you know, less area for fatigue and for cracking. The first one I would do is this number 2 primary here. This one starts off on this this kind of the front portion of the collector, and it's basically 3 90-degree bends, and from memory it's then a 30. So we're looking to try and at the minute just kind of get it roughly in our heads as to where it wants to be. So I would swing that around a bit, bring that up. The further we rotate this round, the higher the whole primary will sit. And the beauty of swinging it around this way is the only clearance we've got to worry about here is wastegate. And again, we can kind of put the wastegate wherever we want. I would normally just have it straight on the end, because we will have clearance to put it straight on the end. But yeah, with these manifolds, we don't have to worry too much about wastegate clearances because we can pretty much put them wherever. Yeah, so okay, I would get that roughly lined up with where I think it would want to be. Mark it, bevel the ends of the bends, and then I would tack these as I go. Like with Warren's manifold that we did, the side mount one, I was kind of taping that up as I was going, but that was because I didn't have a cut sheet for that, so I didn't know exactly what worked. I was working off of what I thought might work, whereas now I know exactly what bends I need to make this manifold. So I can go ahead and get some of these beveled up, tack together, and start creating the first primary. We've got the manifold fabricated and bolted on, so this is our basically standard off-the-shelf T4 twin scroll external wastegate manifold for our EFR kit. So obviously we've got the SX200 on this manifold, so we know the clearances are okay because we checked that with the jig manifold before we actually assembled it. But now we've actually got it on the car, we can start checking all the other components of the kit so that we know it fits just like an EFR would. So standard breather tube, which is, you know, that's a given because it's the same manifold. Same intake pipe, fits no problem. So full 90mm intake pipe, but the 100mm intake pipe will fit as well because there's plenty of clearance. So whether it's 90 or 100, they both fit. You only really need the 100mm intake kind of past like 600 horsepower though, so for most people the 90mm intake's fine. So to fit that intake without having to have like a silicon 90-degree bend and then, you know, like an alloy bend over the top, which is like what most kits tend to be and how we used to do it, it never really fits that well because everything gets a bit too high, a bit too tight around the coolant hose and then the cam belt cover. So we kind of reroute it and then reroute this coolant pipe here. So you've got a whole new radiator pipe. This is like a prototype one, which has just been fitted onto my car, which is kind of like the jig car. But these are like mandrel bent now, basically. So it's like a one-piece pipe. So yeah, that gives loads of clearance for like the 90mm or the 80mm intake, where it's like straight into the turbo. There's no need for a silicon 90-degree bend, which there's nothing wrong with it as such. It's just the clearances all get really tight. So this is a much better way of doing it in terms of keeping things from rubbing and touching against each other. Again, which is definitely not what you want on a competition car. If you're going to be racing, you need reliability. So that means, you know, clearances are, you know, you want as much room around everything as you can. So yeah, Check the wastegate clearances, no problem either side, onto the compressor cover. If it was a bigger compressor cover, we probably would need to crank this wastegate entry around, manifold exit wastegate entry around, like we do with the 9180 EFR kit, because the compressor cover is so large, it just basically encroaches into where the wastegate would sit in this position. So we basically have to put a small bend and bring the wastegate to the front. The only issue with that is it gives you a bit tighter radiator clearance. But it still fits, it's just not ideal. So with the smaller turbos, we definitely want to keep the wastegates straight out and as tight to the block as we can. So the oil return and oil feed are basically the same as an EFR kit. The fittings are slightly different, but in terms of how they fit, how long the oil line needs to be, how the oil return fits, it's basically the same. They're just different thread pitches and different bolt spacings on the oil return. There's obviously no water cooling on this, so what we will do essentially is just block off the lines for like a kind of off-the-shelf kit. But for Justyns, what we're going to do is he's going to run water-cooled wastegates. So essentially, instead of cooling the turbo, we're actually just going to use the same pipework route and cool the wastegates. Because again, he's using it on track, competition car, so if we can keep things cool, we may as well. Okay, so 3.5-inch downpipe as well. Now, 3.5-inch downpipe's not really required, at the kind of power levels that Justyn wants to run. I wouldn't really say you need a 3.5-inch downpipe until you really want to push that high 500s. But that's not to say that there aren't marginal gains by having a larger downpipe. It's probably just not worth the extra work for lower horsepower figures. The only reason we're going for a 3.5-inch downpipe on Justyns is so that, because Justyns is kind of like a test kit, we want to make sure that there are no limitations. This turbo will do a lot more than what Justyn wants, so we'll probably find out what it can do on the dyno, and then Justyn will have it turned back to the power level he wants to run. So we've got the wastegates to tie in. Obviously this is a track car for Justyn, so he needs the wastegates back into the downpipes. No crazy bonnet exit screamers on Justyn's car, unfortunately. So this first one will just be like a flex joint and then tied into the downpipe at as shallow an angle as we can get away with. This one will basically be the same, but we've obviously got a longer route and we'll put it in a bit further down the downpipe. The other advantage of a 3.5-inch downpipe on a twin external gate turbo, when you want to tie the wastegates back into the downpipes, is instantly gives you that extra volume on the inside of the downpipe to carry that wastegate exhaust gas. So rather than trying to put two wastegates back into a 3-inch downpipe, you've kind of got three inlets for gas then, rather than just the turbo. You've got the two wastegates as well. So that's another advantage of the 3.5-inch downpipe. We just want to make sure that there's no restrictions on this kit for testing purposes, basically. Okay, so from the bottom we can see I've got loads of clearance, even though it is a 3.5-inch downpipe. It is pretty tricky to get it to fit, but it's taken me a while to figure out how to make it work, because there's really not a lot of space between the turbine exit and the engine mount, and they're kind of your biggest, well, the engine mount's the biggest issue on Astra VXR downpipes if you want to try and keep the turbo in the middle of the engine. Obviously you can go further that way, which gives you a bit more space, but then it compromises your intake. So from a turbo perspective, I'd always rather compromise the turbine outlet than the compressor intake. So we've got a full 3.5-inch exhaust system. Again, not really required. Definitely wouldn't recommend it for somebody unless they want like high 500-600 horsepower and want no restrictions. It is more expensive. There is a lot more work in it. The clearances are a lot tighter. Again, we've had to keep as much ground clearance as we can because it's going to be on a track car. So, the car is probably lower than a road car would be. And we just want to keep as much clearance as we can. because as soon as you start dragging the flexi along the floor and things like that, they get damaged, and they can easily ruin your weekend. Yeah, so we've got the first portion kind of welded up, and the rest of it's just tacked up so far. So we've got a V-band joining at the front there at the subframe, and then another V-band joining here. So that's kind of like your flex section. Again, stepping under this subframe is always a little bit tricky in terms of keeping it as high as you can, because where the sump isn't actually in line with the exhaust tunnel, and then you've got this engine mount that sticks out as well. So again, we want to try and keep it as high as we can, which means getting right up into that subframe kind of hump. So we want to try and keep it as high into there as we can to keep the most amount of good ground clearance, and then again get the exhaust high up so that when we start trying to put a really big centre silencer in it, we can go for a 5-inch body silencer and not have to worry about any kind of ground clearance, which is what we've managed to do here. So because we've got the exhaust so high, we've managed to keep the silencer really high, and even with a 5-inch body, it's not actually showing beneath the car when you look from the side profile. So this has got a full, like a 700mm long 5-inch body silencer, which is, there's probably more volume in this in terms of internal volume than what there is in our regular 3-inch systems back box. So that's going to kill a load of decibels to start with. Again, 3.5-inch system, it will be louder. So yeah, we've got that huge centre silencer, and then at the back we're going to have a 8-inch body. Our regular exhaust system has a 6-inch body, so we're going to have an 8-inch body silencer, which again is almost doubles the actual internal volume of the silencer. So we're hoping it'll be pretty quiet, and it shouldn't have any issues at any UK tracks, which is obviously what you want with a track car. It'll still be loud enough when you put your foot down that it'll sound like a fast car, but we won't have any of the worry of it not passing trackside noise tests, which is always a bit of a nuisance.